The Lost History of White Slavery in America. And the first slaves that were imported into America were about 100 white children in 1619, just before Easter. So think about that, and this is thoughts while thinking, and these opinions are mine. And the Irish, they were brought over in slaves, and they were white, and they were slaves, and think about that. And uh, Irish slaves were treated awful, and they were bad. But I don't hear anybody of the Irish descent bitching about their forefathers being slaves. I just don't understand that victimology. And their children were working in the factories and doing real dirty work from the time they was almost able to walk. And they were packed in those elevators like sardines in the coal mines, and they worked hard, and they were mistreated, and they were from Ireland, and they were from slaves, and Ireland had slaves from 1612 to 1865. That's when the Irish slaves in America were freed too, at the same time the black slaves were. But you don't hear anything about that in history. So let's talk about it. They worked in the cotton fields, and they worked in the laundry, and when they were out of line, they were starved to death and sometimes even burnt, and they were really mistreated people. They were lower than dirt. And I hadn't heard of them bitching that the world owes them anything. And I admire that. And there's some of them they just almost withered away with the way they were treated and fed. It was a disaster for the Irish slaves. And the children, they worked hard, and they worked all long hours. And they worked on the plantations, and they were whipped when they didn't produce. And white history of slavery has almost disappeared. You can't hardly find it, but if you dig hard enough, you can. And there were slave owners, and they were the property of people, and they were punished when they didn't turn out the way they wanted them to. And when they rebelled, they were sometimes burnt up. And the children, they worked in the laundries too. They just worked almost any place. And it was white slavery. And it was a terrible situation at the time. And if you thought that only Africans and other blacks were enslaved in Barbados, you got to look at West Indies and India, and they all had Irish slaves. Now think about that. The Irish were really mistreated all over, and they were enslaved, and they were white. And the Irish slaves were treated worse than the African slaves during the 19th century in the United States. And then we have the Mexicans, and they were almost indentured servants. And back in the Depression days, they basically worked for food, and they had a tough time doing because they were discriminated against too. And the first slave owner in America was a black man. He was Anthony Johnson. He had an indentured servant, and he went to the courts and at the time, and they gave him endorsed him over as a slave, and that was the first slave in America. And the slave economy is equal reparations. Well, what is that? We got to think about that. And who is going to pay for those reparations that they're talking about? And who's going to get the money? Is it just going to be for the blacks, or is it going to also be for the Irish? We got to think about it. And then there's some of us that's going to sit there and say we identify as blacks and try to get some of that money. It's easy money. And then we got Kamala and her great-grandparents owned Irish slaves. Is she going to have to pay reparations to those white slaves? Now, that's the one. And really, who's going to pay? And is it justice or is it theft? We got to think about what it really is. We got to go from there. And what about those people that never owned slaves, giving money to those people that never were slaves? Now think about that. I'm telling you, there's a lot wrapped around my head and thinking about that. And some of them, they just want easy money. They don't even really know what it is. They just want it. And we got to remember what the old Irish prayer was. It says, "May God give you for every storm a rainbow, for every tear a smile, and for every care a promise, and a blessing in each trial. For every problem life sends, faithful friends shall give you a sign of sweet song and prayer, and answer for the prayer." And that's the Irish prayer that is worth working for, and it's thoughts while thinking, and it's adios amigos, and we will see you on the flip side.